All right, let's do this. So I got to tell you, first of all, does anyone know what happens if you hit Control Alt F8? What happens in Red Hat? I did not know. You get a virtual terminal, and it's just a screen with a blinking cursor. And I was zoomed way in, so an hour before I'm running through everything, and I'm like, how do I pop out a full, and then I could not reset it. And then I was like installing new virtual machines. I had 3 laptops going. I'm like, ah. So anyhow, don't do that. Don't do that. That is the launch code. So we're going to talk about getting started on, Getting started on .NET for Red Hat developers. That's basically what the thing was, but it was a little bit longer, but I condensed it. So first of all, Red Hat loves .NET. .NET loves Red Hat. This is really cool. But what is that .NET thing again? So who here has never used .NET at all? All right. Who here is on the .NET team at Microsoft? Yeah, that's about half you. So awesome. So we have a little bit of variety. So I'm going to run through, kind of what .NET is and why you should care. And then we'll dig into how to use it and deploy it and all that. So definitely a lot of people are using .NET in general. I mean, it's very popular, of course, on Windows desktop and Windows applications. It's very popular for applications, ASP.NET applications, web apps. Stack Overflow runs on .NET, so a lot on ASP.NET. So definitely a lot of use of .NET overall worldwide. But we're really looking now at expanding out the family. And you saw Scott Hanselman talk about this on the first day if you were here, where he kind of explained how we're moving from this .NET framework that just lives in Windows, and it's this whole framework that's installed with Windows, and it's kind of you have it or you don't, right? And we're moving to this .NET Core to give you that option as well. So with .NET Core, you've got this small, lightweight runtime that goes anywhere. It can go on Windows, Mac, Linux. Depending on the day, it might run on a Raspberry Pi. And the idea is also that it's so small you can use it side by side. So you can have on one server, you can have multiple versions of .NET. That always broke my heart when a new version of .NET came out. I wanted to use all the new features, and the IT meanies said, no, we're not updating for 4 years, and I was just stuck with the old stuff. So that's exciting. And then, of course, .NET also bringing Xamarin in. That's also really cool. Now you really kind of have the option with .NET of building for Windows, Mac, Linux, all mobile platforms, web apps, kind of all over the place. So it's really exciting to see what you can do as a .NET developer really expand over the past few years. So this is kind of how things break apart. If you look at that's neat. .NET, what you'll use to build what. So generally, .NET framework, the full framework, you're going to use for desktop applications, for things that you know are going to run on Windows. If you have existing applications running on the full .NET framework, you'll probably want to keep with those. It's usually not worthwhile to do a full, rewrite port of your application code unless you really want to use the new features, go cross-platform, et cetera. .NET Core. One really key feature, one obvious place to use it is ASP.NET Core. You can get great server density, run multiple applications in one server in a lot smaller space than you could have before. And then Xamarin, again, as I was saying, for mobile applications. And the goal, we've started with each of these kind of as a separate stack, but the goal is to move to one kind of net standard library to rule them all. So you can use your libraries back and forth. You've got a great encryption library or a great JSON library or whatever in your Xamarin apps. You use it also in your .NET Core apps and your full .NET Framework apps as well. And for tools, the 2 tools we ship, Visual Studio, that's the full Visual Studio desktop application, has been around for a long time, running on Windows. Great IDE. If you're on Windows, it's a pretty phenomenal editor. We also ship Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is open source, cross-platform. It's very lightweight. I've reinstalled it on a bunch of different computers over the past few days, and it's like click, 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 and it's down very quickly. It is free, so you go to code.visualstudio.com, or if you just go to visualstudio.com, it'll point you in the right direction. But part of the goal here is, these are the tools we ship, but part of the goal, especially with .NET Core, is we want you to develop using any editor you'd like. If you want to use Notepad, you want to use Vim, Emacs, whatever it is, Sublime, we've got we're working so that the IntelliSense kind of flows through to that as well. Awesome, I'm going to skip through. So you saw this slide the first day. We had some questions afterwards. People are saying, where are those benchmarks coming from? What is that? And these are the Tech Empower benchmarks. So kind of early on in the process as we were developing .NET, we said, wow, this is a great opportunity for a really fast web server. Like, why can't we make ASP.NET really, really fast? It's compiled. It's got all these language features that really make it ideal for a fast web server, so why don't we do that? So two things I want to show you with that real quick. If we go to so these are the actual, this is our benchmarks repo. If you want to run through and do these, run these yourself, you can. This shows kind of what our current things are that we're getting, and it explains to you how to set them up. It's actually kind of fun to go through and set them up. And these are based on the Tech Empower web framework benchmarks, which are, it's kind of cool reading the specs for these. They'll say, this is what your app must do. You must respond to a GET request with this kind of header. You must fail on this kind of request, et cetera. So this really kind of goes through and explains how they're set up and what you need to do, what the different tests are, and what environments. So they're up to around 12. They haven't done a test using our new ASP.NET Core that we just shipped. We're really looking forward to around 13. They're going to include that in there. So that is that. Any questions so far? Everybody happy? Asleep? So yeah, you did see, you got to have all the NASCAR stickers on your open source slide. We've got tons of them. The idea really is, it is important to us to build in the open, to build with community. We have seen some fabulous contribution from the community as we're building. Some of our Kestrel, our web server performance improvements have come from the community. And it's been really great to go into and watch them in real time. So if I go into, close that. For any of these repos, so if I go to, say, ASP.NET MVC, let's see if those guys are busy today. They just shipped, so they may be taking the day off. No, OK, 7 hours ago, a day ago, 4 days ago. So these are all the commits that are coming in. So this is the actual repo. This is, it's not like there's a hidden repo and we're kind of copying stuff over. This is the issues list. You can go through. You can log an issue yourself. You can view the discussion. You can interact with developers as they're working on it and say, I think it should be this way. And they'll say, well, we did it because of this, but we're considering what you're saying, that kind of thing. So it really is it's an actual open source project the way it should be. And the .NET Foundation, of course, we're excited to have Red Hat involved, and we've got JetBrains, Unity. And the idea with the .NET Foundation or steering committee is to have community impact and oversight into where .NET is going, to give you confidence that you can count on .NET to be a platform that's going to work for you, and that Microsoft's not going to pull the rug out from under you, or they've got this devilish 15-year plan of how to sneak something by you. It really is an idea of that we want you to trust us because we're working with this foundation that's overseeing things. And Samsung just joined us. They've made some cool contributions for the ARM virtual machine emulator and stuff lately. So great, lots of slides. Let's talk about getting set up. So first of all, if we go over to, I've got a Red Hat box. I have enabled millennial mode with the dark color pattern here. So if I zoom in, no. So it's fun trying to zoom. And this is the one where I'm scared to death to do anything wrong, because if I do, it just might give me that flashing cursor that I don't know what to do anymore with. So we'll just do that. OK, so here I've got .NET installed. And doing that is very, it's a quick process. Let me flip back over to a browser and I'll back up a bit and I'll show you where I got that from. So if we go to So I decided to prank myself by installing the Russian keyboard, and occasionally I'll hit the thing and switch keyboard modes, and that's fun. So if you go to .NET, this is where it'll take you to. So it'll explain what is .NET in case you weren't listening to me. They also have this cool thing that we've been adding into some of our documentation, which is this live code editor, so you can play with .NET and see if you love it or whatever. So we'll do that, and then I can hit run. And so it's actually, these are live interactive things, and so there's a full tutorial for that. And so if you click through, there's this learn more that'll explain things. If you click on download .NET Core, so this detects what operating system you're on, and it'll show you how to install for the different operating systems. So they've converged quite a bit. It used to be that each one was pretty different because all the platforms are pretty different. We've tried to be very true to how you would expect to how you'd expect to install things on your operating system. So for instance, for Red Hat, you're going to yum. You'll do yum install. And of course, we work with the SCL. And so, but once you've got it installed, you're going to see it's basically the same for all of them. You do .NET new to create a new project, .NET restore to restore packages, and then .NET run. So I ran through I've run through these a million times here. It really is pretty quick, depending on your Wi-Fi, but that's all that's required for that. It's also cool that we've got support for Docker as well. So I actually have Docker. I had a Docker demo set up on my Mac, but they told me not to mess with switching around the displays. But that one literally is very quick. It's Docker run -IT Microsoft .NET latest. So this is just a standard Docker image up in the Docker hub. And then all this stuff is the exact same again, the way you develop with it. And then, of course, for Mac, you'll see you'll do brew install for OpenSSL, and after that, we've got a package installer. On that, usually the slowest part of the install for me is typing in my password. Like it literally is seconds. It's like done, and I'm like, that can't have been it, and I run through it again 2 or 3 times because it's just too fast. So that's cool. So anyways, there's also the option for all of these. If you click on this other downloads, you can go through and you can get you can get the binaries. You can also do daily builds if you'd like. So when you do that, the complexity level goes up quite a bit because you're also then working with different packages, and you have to really kind of understand how to kind of brew everything together correctly. But it is available, so you can go through and do that as well. All right, so that is installing. Once I've got that set up, then it's as simple as I've got .NET installed. Then I can do .NET new. I've just created a project. So if I look at what's in there, I've got a program and a project. Do I need to zoom more? Probably.
Works here.
Works there? Okay.
Go back down.
Go down more. No, I can't, apparently. All right. So if I say, cat. So this is my hello world. It's an enormous hello world, right? But that's all there is in there. And then there's also this project JSON. And that lists what the dependencies are. Now in this application, hello world does not include any dependencies. We made the daring decision not to pull in a left pad package for our hello world application. So then if I do, nobody, NPM? No? Okay. Oh, good. Okay, so then if I do .NET restore, there's no packages, so it should be really, really fast. Okay, and then I say .NET build, or I can just say .NET run. If I say .NET build or .NET run and I haven't built before, then it's going to compile it for me. So that's really the kind of general flow for command line development. If you want to do things from command line, that's all available. If you do things from IDEs, you'll see actually that they're running through those same kind of endpoints. So there's no kind of secret backdoors that you need to kind of worry about. That's how kind of everything is plumbed together. So that's that. Now if I go in, if I don't want to do this all from command line, I can do code dot, I believe. So here I've got Visual Studio Code installed. So Visual Studio Code is this lightweight editor. It is not just a text editor. It's more than that. And I'm actually going to skip out of this, and I'm going to do, because I like living on the edge, I'm going to run the insiders install. So that's the nightly build of Visual Studio Code. So the reason I'm doing that is that's a simpler path for setting up debugging. That'll give me debugging really easily as well. So if I click on Programs CS, then that says, hey, do you want to set up debugging? So I say yes. So that configures that for me. There we go. So then I can go, I can do my standard kind of breakpoints and all that sort of stuff. Wow. There's an update since I installed it, since the beginning of the talk. So that should go and hit this breakpoint. But it's kind of, there it is. OK, good. So there's my breakpoint. There's not really a whole lot to see, but the idea is it is kind of full debugging. And if you'd like to integrate it with any other editor, you can do that. There's packages for just about any of them. All right, so that's getting set up on Red Hat desktop. Any questions on that so far? I wasn't sure what would be the most interesting out of that. So we saw Red Hat. We saw a little bit of the .NET Sdk Cli. So that's the command line interface. And that's the thing where I'm typing in .NET new, .NET restore. And like any command line, you can get help from it. And there's also documentation in here as well about how that Sdk CLI works. We saw Visual Studio Code. That runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So I've got it on here as well. It's the same thing, right? So that's kind of cool. So I can open up anything as well. We've got an extension manager. We've got it's got Git support. It's got debugging. A lot of people are surprised at the different languages that we offer support for. So in addition to C#, of course, we've got Python, C++, Go, all kinds of stuff. And a lot of these are community contributed as well. For Visual Studio, there's an update 3, and then there's a tools package for it, like a web tools update. What I usually do for that kind of stuff, there's probably a smarter way, but I usually go to visualstudio.com. And then I read the news while I'm waiting, and then I scroll to the bottom. And usually they have the Visual Studio blog if I don't see what I'm looking for right away, and they just had a big post about this. So this explains what's in Visual Studio Update 3 and how to install it and everything. So in Visual Studio, this is a place where if you've done any kind of Visual Studio C# development in the past, this is a place where, like up till now, everything's new and different. For a lot of this, this is where it feels really pretty much the same. So if I create a web application, let's say sure, web app. And I didn't mean to do that. I hate it when I do that. So it's going to go and create a web application for me, and it's going to go through restore packages automatically for me. One nice thing for this, if you're used to developing on ASP.NET, is you'll see the kind of standard models, views, controllers. A lot of the kind of application code you've written before, that all stays pretty much the same. So what I usually tell people is if they've used ASP.NET before, is that your kind of standard app code, model views, controllers, your services, your C# code that you wrote from scratch, that's your classes, Those things usually stay pretty much the same. The things that change the most are all the plumbing underlying things. If you've written a lot of MVC filters, if you've got custom dependency injection and testing and all these kind of frameworks that are wired in, if you've got things that you're changing with how the application is hosted, those are the things that have changed the most. So we'll look at that in a minute, but I just wanted to show you kind of the general getting started thing. This is what you do in order to get started on the different platforms. I'm not showing you on the Mac, but it's basically, like I said, the same thing. You can use Visual Studio Code, Sublime, et cetera, and you install the .NET CLI, and you're good to go. All right. We saw that. We saw that. We saw that. All right. Let's talk about deploying applications. So OpenShift is like super cool, and it's coming very soon, but it doesn't actually work this exact minute. And I actually stayed up till way too crazy late last night trying to get this working, and it turns out that there's like a base image, Docker image that we're depending on, that hasn't been updated yet. And I talked, Eric helped me, Eric on the OpenShift team, and we looked at it and we were like, we could hack this, we could fake it. But that doesn't do any of you any good because it's not going to work for you, and you're going to watch me do this, and it's not going to work. What I am going to tell you about, I'll explain OpenShift and how ASP.NET integrates with it, and I'll show you where to go for when it is supported. And it's so close, I'm expecting like days. So the idea with OpenShift, it's platform as a service. It's built on top of Docker. I am not an expert in it. If you are interested in OpenShift, you've probably seen a presentation or two from it this week, and there are people you can talk to on the floor out there. But I've had fun playing with it. I will tell you, it's despite my app not working. So, but the idea is, you get the benefit of deploying to Docker containers, but you don't have to worry about all the management and fiddling stuff because it's going to provision and spin them up and down for you. To where my setup for that is, I went out in here. I can go in. I can say new project, and I can pick from a different template. So I'll say test, and I'm gonna not be doing this anyhow. I'll delete it. But I could go through and create. So soon, from what they tell me, the idea is there's going to be an official Red Hat supported image, Docker image available, and that's going to cause it later to show up here as a template here. So that will be cool. You can spin down the list, and you can click on .NET, and you'll be set to go. The other way that you can do things is using this OC tool. So let's see if that's going to work. Yes. OK. Zoom this up. So the OC tool is the command line tool you use to create new things, et cetera. So I could say OC new or OC this or that. So I don't think it's really worth the time in going through it because it's actually going to fail, but I'll see how I am on time. If I go to S2I, so there is a great blog post. And this worked with a previous version of ASP.NET and .NET Core. .NET Core, there's been changes because it was before. We wanted to break everything we could before release and not break things after release. So things changed before release. So the idea here is if there is not a template available, you can create a builder image using this S2I tool. And so there is an S2I template available, and this is an example, and there's also the builder repository here. So we were digging all into this. It's basically there's a Docker file which explains how to build the image, and then there's an S2I directory that has all the run and assemble commands. So run, I do want to show you this because this is just .NET run, right? So this, you'll see this we'll keep coming back to this, everything is built on top of .NET Run, .NET Restore, .NET Build, all that. And so it is kind of nice once you get to the integration points to be able to say, oh, I know this. It's the same thing again, right? So if we look at .NET Assemble, there's some stuff up above, but when we get to the guts of it, it's .NET Restore and .NET Build. Right? So that's kind of the idea. So if we did, let's see if I want to go through this real quick. What happens is you click through this. It really takes just a few minutes. You should see this. Instead, there's a log message, and the log message is pretty clear, and it says basically this keyword is not understood, project keyword is not understood, and that means that it's a previous version of .NET, right? So, but this is really command line wise. So next week or 2 weeks from now, this is how you'll deploy an OpenShift image using ASP.NET Core, is typing about 5 lines. And then soon after that, the way you'll do it is using a template in the gallery. So that is deploying to OpenShift. Like I said, I had a lot of fun playing with it. You can sign up for free, et cetera. So that's deploying to OpenShift. Now, we also showed during Scott Hanselman's keynote, we showed deploying to Jenkins and Octopus and VSTS, et cetera. So I wanted to show you how we set up the Jenkins bit, because that actually was kind of fun. So here is the actual project for it. And if we look in configure, so I went through and I configured an access token pointing to my Git repo. So you can do username, password, login. It's more secure to use a token if you can. So GitHub offers them, VSTS offers them, et cetera. So those are my credentials for that. But here, if we look at so that is it for my Jenkins script, right? So again, we move into the directory. We do .NET Restore and .NET Build. The one step I needed to do before doing this was install .NET onto this Jenkins server. So I RDP'd in and ran the standard commands for installing .NET. This one was on Windows, but it would have been the same anywhere else. So you install .NET, and then setting up a build server is .NET Restore and .NET Build. So then if we look at the builds, we can look at, say, console output. And this is the same kind of thing that you'll see anywhere else, right? So it's doing it's doing a get pull. It does restoring packages. So this is a standard package restore step. And then it just does a build. It's doing .NET Build. And this one was previously compiled. So the whole, actually, the whole build step here takes, let's do a build. So we can feel productive. We're accomplishing great things. And also, I want this kind of cloudy thing. I think we're going to break through to having fully sunny, because the last 5 builds will have been good builds. And usually the builds takes about 7 seconds. So there, yep, so that was good. Oops. There we are, we're sunny. So, all right, .NET has made our lives better. Okay, so Docker. Docker is kind of the standard. You have Docker set up. So let's look at Docker install. So now this is fast, providing you've got the internet, because pulling down Docker images can take a while, right? So in my hotel, this took like forever to pull the images down, and then seconds to actually run, right? So that's all you run, Docker run IT. Of course, you can build images on top of that. In May, I did a big demo where I did Docker Swarm, and I spun up tons of images, and it was the same kind of thing, just using Docker Swarm. So that's it. Then the same standard steps, .NET New, restore, and run. Or, of course, create the project, clone a project, et cetera, and then restore and run. So that is that. And then, of course, Windows and IIS. So I have to mention this because some people, like I show all this other stuff and they're like, oh, so you gave up on all that, or IIS doesn't work anymore, or they like freak out, right? So let me show you actually how that is wired up. If we go into this application, so this was my file new project. And if we look here, we should see, where am I looking? IIS. There it is. Unless they moved it on me. They totally moved it on me. There it is, use IIS integration, right? So what's cool with this is use IIS integration will, if there's a package included, and the way that it works, it'll say, hey, is IIS present on this machine? Yes, great, use it. If not, it's just a no-op, it just skips right over, right? So there's a package for that, there's a dependency, or NuGet dependency on that. So it's just this server IIS integration. So that's all that's involved there. And how does it work without IIS? Cliffhanger, we'll get to that in a second. So we looked at that. Oh, so one other thing I wanted to point out as far as installing it is we do have, as part of our partnership with Red Hat, and just partly because we have tons of open source images on Azure as well, if you go to Azure, we have a supported image in our marketplace. So you can go through and do create virtual machine. So I literally, in my panic moment, right, when I thought I destroyed my virtual machine, I went out and spun one up. Clicking through and filling in the thing takes, a minute. It does take, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes, depending, to actually provision the virtual machine. It can take a little, it takes a few minutes, but it's pretty quick. And then once you're done, let me see if I have it still running. Maybe I'll come back to it. Oh. Yeah. All right, so that is that. So this is a premium supported, pay-as-you-go image for, and so we've got Red Hat 7.2, 6.8, and what's the previous one? 6.4. So great. Okay, so there we've talked about .NET pretty much generically, how to get it on a platform, how to use it. One of the main workloads that you'll probably use .NET for in the near future is ASP.NET. It's easy to use cross-platform. It's something where taking a web workload to another server or to multiple servers is kind of a no-brainer. Use it on Docker, et cetera, right? As a side note, I'm not sure, is this cloud raining on that girl's phone? Like she held up her phone and rain? I'm not sure. I love that slide, though. So kind of the goals. I haven't updated this slide, but actually that gives me a good chance to point out what the history here. So we started with ASP.NET 5. We were at ASP.NET 4.5 and then 4.6, and we're like, what's the next version? 5. And so we started with ASP.NET 5. Actually, it was originally called Project K, and so then there was ASP.NET 5, and then the community was confused, and we wanted to be really clear that in a lot of ways this is a version 1. We've definitely built on the history of ASP.NET. We've brought over code that makes sense, but it really is in a lot of ways a version 1 because the guts and the internals have changed so much, right? So it's very mature from the point of view of the application stuff. It is 1.0 in terms of you're not going to just copy your code over and from 4.x to ASP.NET Core and everything just magically works. There are changes, right? So here are the goals that we created ASP.NET for. So totally modular. So the idea before was the whole .NET Foundation is big. It's one install, you have it or you don't. Your web application used system.web. So that included ASP.NET Web Forms. It also included MVC. So that is actually a pretty big DLL, and it includes all kinds of stuff. It includes everything you'd need for web forms. It includes Tons of different, if you go through and look at APIs that are supported in there, it's a trip down memory lane. If you've been in the .NET world for a while, there's a lot of things that are not necessarily used in very many web apps anymore. So looking at what's become a much more popular way of building web applications these days is Ruby gems or NPM packages or any of the web frameworks. It's very popular to do that. And we've had NuGet for a while. We've slowly kind of been changing over ASP.NET to be more NuGet based. You'll really see now that it is completely NuGet based. So everything is a NuGet package. Your application is an assembly of NuGet packages. So if we look at my web app here, you'll see that everything in here, like my hosting stuff, that's NuGet. MVC, so the MVC framework, that's NuGet as well. So even serving static files, that comes in as a separate NuGet package. So the goal of that is that you have total control of your application. If you want a very lightweight server that only is responding to API requests, then you can cut out the memory footprint, you can cut out the drive space footprint, you can build very lean modular applications. And so you only pay for what you use as opposed to we give you everything and maybe you'll use some of it, right? So you have that full control. Now, you don't have to worry about that if you're not a control freak because File New Project sets this up for me and I'm all set, right? I didn't have to go through and hand tailor this. But if you do want that control, you can use it. And it can be as simple as if I go through and remove one of these packages from here, my application breaks in a few places, and I say, oh, I guess I needed that package, right? So that is the modular stuff. So seamless transition from on-premises to cloud. I refuse to say on-premise. So seamless transition from on-premises to cloud. And the goal here is that your web applications are probably going to function a little differently between your desktop and your stage server and your testing server and your production server. One big thing is you don't want to have your passwords up in source control or up in the cloud in an easy to get to place, right? You don't want to have a file that has all your connection strings and things. And there are a lot of other things about how you build your app that you really want to build differently in your different environments. So we really have embraced this environment variables and environments in general. So my application will do things like say, if I am in production, so our configuration will say things like, if I'm in development, then I want to do some local telemetry. I want to understand how my code's working. But I don't necessarily want to have that in production, right? Or if I want to say things like, if I'm in development, I'm going to turn on a developer exception page. It's going to give me detailed exceptions. It's going to explain everything, every crash and what went wrong. But if I'm in production, turn that off. Also, if I'm developing locally, we turn on browser link, which is this great feature where you can go in, you change the code in Visual Studio, and it'll immediately update via WebSockets in your browser, and vice versa. So you can use Chrome developer tools, Edge developer tools, any of the developer tools, edit in your browser, and you'll see that code be pushed back into CSS or HTML. So you tick that to check it on in case you're worried. It doesn't start monkeying with your code unless you tell it to. So this says, if you're in development, do all this stuff. Otherwise, use a production exception handler. And so we also do that in terms of how you're doing your application secrets. So we use environment variables, and we say if you are, if you're running local, we pull in your app settings, and we'll work with your local app settings. We also have a secrets manager for running locally, so makes it easy to set up environment variables locally. Up on your production server, you're going to configure environment variables for your important settings, and they're not just going to be files, they'll be stored securely using the different server architectures for doing that. So for instance, like on Windows, it's dpappy. I'm not sure what it is for Red Hat, but I'm sure there's at least one good way and probably several for doing that, right? Okay, so that's the transition thing. Open source with contributions. So that is something kind of from the beginning. We really wanted that to be key. That's all throughout .NET Core, of course. ASP.NET, this new version has been that way. So that goes from the compiler and the runtime all the way up to the application layer. Great. OK, faster development cycle. So the idea is that your build, recompile, all that stuff is very quick. We do some really cool things with compiling in memory. So you're not waiting for things to be full compiles. It'll do differential compiles using Roslyn. So Roslyn, our compiler, is able to say, you only change this file. I'm only going to make this small update. So it can make those compilation changes as you're working. Choosing editors of your choice. So in the past, you really kind of had to use Visual Studio to build ASP.NET applications. It was really pretty difficult to do anything else. And so this has been kind of built from the beginning to say, like, if we're going to develop in Sublime, if you're going to develop in whatever editor of your choice, we want that to work. So the team's actually been developing this way throughout the life cycle of the product to make sure that it works. If there's a problem, they're developing web apps, and they're saying, wait a minute, I couldn't do this, and they file a bug. And then, of course, cross-platform, as I said. And fast. OK, so I said fast. I talked about Kestrel. So that's this new HTTP server. And so the idea with that HTTP server is, as opposed to the previous model with ASP.NET, is you kind of ran, your application was here. It ran inside of ASP.NET, which ran inside of IIS, right? So if you wanted to make any changes, you're kind of stuck saying, like, hey, please, could you do this thing? No? OK. Or you edit some XML and really hope things didn't break, right? But you were not kind of in this full control. So we've really kind of changed the whole we've turned that around so that your application now is running, has a lot more control. One way that works is with Kestrel. So the whole the way that Kestrel is bootstrapped, you'll see here, is actually, it's like a console. This is the same thing you'd see as a console application. And then we're pulling in, we say, use Kestrel. So an important thing to realize with Kestrel 2 is it is more similar in the web world to something like Node.exe, right? So just like you probably wouldn't want to run a production server with Node.exe just exposed to the outside world, normally you'll want to reverse proxy, and you'll use Nginx or Apache or something right in front of that to load balance, for security, for configurability, all those things. So, and also to watch the process, right? You'll have process watchers and things. So that's a similar kind of model that we're using here. So Kestrel is, we expect you, when you run it on Red Hat, on other servers that don't have IIS, that you're going to set it up using Apache, Nginx, et cetera. So we have guidance for how to do that. If we go to docs.asp.net, there's something on here about, there's guidance for hosting providers, and there's information in here as well if I search for Nginx. Right, so publishing to a Linux production environment. So it explains kind of how you're going to want to go through and configure that. So it's an important difference if you've done any work with ASP.NET applications in the past. It is an important difference. We really are kind of expecting that you're going to have something on the front that's passing through, that's doing keep alives, et cetera, for Kestrel. Make sense? Good? All right. All right, so project system. So the project system is still kind of changing. There is some flux to it because we've shipped a release version, RTM, of .NET Core and ASP.NET. The tools are actually still in preview. So that includes the SDK and the Visual Studio tools. So they work. I'm using them, but we're still kind of improving them more. Whereas .NET Core and ASP.NET Core are production ready. They are, we feel confident in saying run your production apps on them. So we're in this place where we didn't want to hold people up that had applications that they wanted to get running on .NET Core. And they said, hey, we're good, we're ready to go, right? There are other customers that said, hey, we don't want to invest until, we don't want to get started until the tools are completely ready and perfect and everything, right? So we've got these two different types of customers, and we want them both happy, right? So the end goal is we say, you guys, you're ready to go? Good, go. You folks, you want perfect, polished, everything's beautiful about the install and everything like that? Great. Okay, we're working on it, and that will be the official release of the tools will be with Visual Studio 15, which is the next release of Visual Studio. Okay, so all that was to say that this is the project system, and there will be some small changes to it. They're still kind of working out the changes to it. But the goals with this are to simplify some of the pain points in .NET developing in the past. So one of those pain points you may have seen is your project file for .NET applications included references to all the files in your project. So if you have two people on a team and you're working in source control, and I add a file and you add a file, well, we didn't just do two adds, we also created a merge conflict because our project files are different, right? So that's unnecessarily frustrating. So that is an example of something that's changed. We really have tried to kind of simplify this so that your project file and configuration is a lot simpler. Also, partly so that you might not be using Visual Studio. Part of the thinking in the past was you're always going to be in Visual Studio. We're going to handle your project file for you. Don't worry about it. As you're working on different platforms and in different editors, that really needs to work everywhere, right? All right, project system. Yeah, so specific to an ASP.NET application. So we've got one thing that's important here, which is you have this www root folder. So in the past, you had your whole application. Your whole application was kind of sitting in www root. And then we had a web config file that said, oh, don't serve this configuration file, and don't serve this source code, and don't serve this, but you can serve these files, And so it was kind of, you had to go through and say what to serve and what not to serve. So the idea now is everything that's not in this www root folder will not be served. The web server doesn't know about it. So if you've got any static resources, images, CSS, JavaScript, you put them directly in there. If you've got something else that's being compiled, if you've got grunt or gulp process, et cetera, you can have them outside of that, like node modules, and then you can have a gulp process or something that will dump the compiled, minified, et cetera, stuff into www root, right? So from a security standpoint, from a simplicity standpoint, you don't have to worry about adding things to your project and then being exposed to the web. So that's www root. Code-based config. So again, in the past, we had more complicated configuration, and you had a web config file that was huge. So now this is the entire web config file, and this is really just set up for IIS integration. So it's not required, right? So instead, your configuration is done in code, and I've already shown you this code before. This is your code that you're going to see in startup.cs. So what's nice with this is you can set a breakpoint. You can debug it. You can a lot more easily reason about it. You can make conditional things and say, if I'm in development, do this. If I'm in production, do that, right? So I've spent too long on different occasions. There's an XML error, or somebody went in and edited a connection string and it broke my project file, or a handler isn't being called up for some reason, et cetera. So we really want it so that here it's code-based, you can reason about it as code. So we have integration for Grunt, Gulp, Bower. There's this cool task manager that's built in. So if you do have, like, say, a Gulp file, then you can go through and you can run these tasks as part of your app. So you can go through and say, execute tasks. So that's cool. They're not required, but we understand they're pretty popular in the web world. So So we have support for that. I think I've covered that stuff enough. Cool. So new pipeline. So the idea with the pipeline is that, like, remember I said before that, here's your app, here's IIS, here's, you were always kind of running inside of ASP.NET and IIS. So now we've changed that around to work with middleware. So the concept here is that you're a lot more in control. So for instance, things like MVC is turned on via middleware, right? Static file serving turned on via middleware. So all these things are pluggable, and each one gets a request, and it says, can I handle this? Do I do anything with this? Yes or no. It can make changes to the request. It can check for header and deny. It can say, I'm good, pass on to the next person, and they'll handle it, et cetera. So it makes it a lot easier to extend. And you can, of course, write your own middleware. There are people that are developing some pretty cool things with middleware out there, so that's cool. Yeah, so middleware. OK. Getting short on time. OK, so here's another cool thing. Before, we had two separate kind of stacks. We had MVC, which was for serving HTML. And we had APIs, which was for serving APIs, HTTP APIs. So we've merged that together. So the idea here is, if you write a controller, or if your controller can serve, in the past, you could only serve HTTP from one or JSON. You couldn't reuse filters or actions, et cetera. So we've merged that together. So it's one kind of set of concepts, and you get a lot more code reuse out of that. So you can have one controller, and you can say, respond to this as HTML, and if somebody queries this API endpoint, respond as this. So for a lot of applications, they ended up having a lot of duplicate controllers, and it was a lot of unnecessary extra code and classes. Cool. I want to show one other one that I'm just excited about as a web dev. This is pretty neat. So Razor is our templating language that when you're creating HTML in your views, you'll go in and you'll say things like, there's not a whole lot of templating going on in these, but there's a little bit. We go through and create data and write things out. I don't have registration turned on, so we don't have much there. But there is, in the past, we would do things like say at HTML dot and insert code like that. These new tag helpers, the idea is that we really want them to just look like HTML. So the idea is, instead of kind of mixing together stuff that looks like code with your HTML, now you can just create a label and say things like ASP.NET4 equals username. And that'll say, I'm going to bind to the model. So that's rendered on the server. That ASP4 username doesn't get rendered to the client. That only stays on the server. But it allows you to edit your HTML as HTML. So you can take advantage of all the HTML editing features. And it's a lot easier to work with for cases like if you're using Bootstrap classes or things like that. Right? One other thing that I like about them is that you've got support for, if we look at our layout, environments. So here we've got an environment, and we can say, render this in development. So in development, render local scripts. In production, I want to use a CDN. But I want to do fallback. Right? This is a classic problem with web dev, is you'll say, I would like to serve my JavaScript and CSS from a CDN, if possible, but if that CDN's down or not reachable, then serve it from this local place. So we've got, this says, we don't do that in development at all. We're not doing CDN development, or CDNs in development. We say, if it's staging or production, then I want to serve this href, and then we have a fallback, which is local. So we say, here's my fallback, and then we have a test. We define a test. So I really like that. They're optional. Some people say, I hate that, but I really feel like it kind of cleans up the code, makes it a lot easier to work with. Also, from cases where I've worked with designers before that were really scared to touch things that look like code and didn't know what they could work on, et cetera. This is a lot kind of simpler to work together on code. All right. Oh no. Sorry. Didn't hit the Shift F5. Great. Shift. Excellent. Okay. So this is what a view would look like before tag helpers, and that's what it looks like after tag helpers. So just aesthetically and also just from using the Visual Studio or other editors that are great with HTML, this is a lot easier to work with. And you can write your own. So there's all kinds of cool tag helpers people are writing. People are doing things like, I don't have time now, but people are doing things like social media login tag helpers, or tag helpers that will integrate with other services, or just do simple things like write out comments with your environment or something like that, right? So I am right at the end of my time. So to summarize, Red Hat loves .NET. You can find out more about the Red Hat initiatives for .NET at redhatloves.net. I actually want to show that real quick because it's super cool. So there's a video here that's about an hour long that walks through. There's information on getting Red Hat. There's information there's a cheat sheet if you're new to Linux as a .NET developer. This is really helpful, this running your ISO on VirtualBox, and there's another one for running your ISO on Hyper-V. So it kind of goes through and explains everything, has some great gotchas and information about like, make sure you don't pick this thing because your machine won't boot up and that kind of stuff, right? So very helpful information there. And to learn more about .NET, you can go to .NET, so dot.net, and that has information you can click through. I showed you how to download it and also how to learn more. Do we have any questions, or you wanted to, yeah?
So let's say we have a team of .NET developers today who work on some ASP for something. I shouldn't have to go to them and scare them and say, hey, we're going to move that over to Linux. But if I just tell them, try to make that work on core.net, and they deliver something saying, hey, we got it working on Windows core.net, I should be able to take that, run it on Linux, patch it with Nginx, and it should just work.
Yes, with caveats. You can always do things wrong, right? When you're developing your app, you can target the .NET full framework, or you can target, so if you build an ASP.NET Core application, it's possible to target the full framework or to target .NET Core. So you'll want to make sure that they're targeting .NET Core. So from creating a new app, there's these two different things. You can also, there's a toggle in your application where you say switch over to support .NET Core. So for file new project, just make sure they're targeting .NET Core if you want to be cross-platform. Also, I definitely recommend, it's very easy to set up like builds on Docker. We've got great tools for building to Docker in Visual Studio now. So you can set up as part of your dev flow, have them build and deploy to Docker from the beginning. So then you've got, you're testing on Linux from the beginning because you're using Docker that's running in Hyper-V, that's running in Windows. So that's really helpful. I've talked a lot with the Docker, the guy that runs the Docker tools for Visual Studio, and he really recommends just beginning of your project, set up Docker and work that way the whole way through. So one other thing, just to be clear, if you've got a lot of existing code, it's generally not going to be simple as copy it over, hey, it all works. It's going to take, we really on the safe side, we recommend if you've got existing code and you don't have a really good reason for rewriting it, it's probably better not to rewrite it. If you do need to go, or if you're very interested in cross-platform, awesome, but just realize that there is some porting work. So I've tried porting applications over. A lot of the time, what I end up doing, file new project, copy all my classes, copy my views, copy my controllers, make it work. You know what I mean? As opposed to go through, change my project, try and migrate. I've done it both ways with them, and it's a lot more work to try and actually update the application as opposed to just copy things over. One other really important thing with that is if you can develop using services, using packages, things that abstract your code as much as possible, then it's not as big of a change. And if you're using ASP.NET web forms, then that's not supported. So ASP.NET MVC comes across pretty easily. Web forms does not. So the thing I tell people with that is that ASP.NET Web Forms has had a thing called model binding for a while, and it's tragically underused. It's a really good feature. So you can go through and you can use Web Forms controls combined to models, and it really works pretty much like the MVC flow. So you have models, and your controllers are the view, and so you get away from working with the events and writing handler code, et cetera. So that is a much smoother kind of transition path. If you've got web forms and you know that eventually you want to get to ASP.NET Core, first get on model binding, then get to MVC, then get to ASP.NET Core. Does that help?
Yeah, but just to sum up, for the .NET developers, the goal in this whole Red Hat loves .NET thing, their goal, coming us from the Linux world and Java and the goal for the .NET developers is making their stuff build and the green build on core.net. If it's green for them on Windows on core.net, that means we can ship it on Linux.
Yeah. So the question, I'm supposed to repeat the questions. Yeah, the question is, if something builds on Windows, should it work on Linux? Yeah, that's definitely the idea. So of course you want to test it and all that. Like I said, you want to get your builds going early as possible. But yeah, and it's not like, hey, it might work. Like this is a real, Microsoft will support you, Red Hat will support you. Like this is real stuff. This is enterprise, So yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so yep. Okay, so the question is, why didn't you just build it so everything works everywhere? And the reason is we've got like .NET and ASP.NET have been around for over 15 years. There's tons of support that's very much that's Windows specific, that is APIs that you can't use, you'll never use on a Mac or Linux, right? There's also things like web forms and Windows forms especially, like that's, right? So that is the whole .NET framework. There are web applications that are using classes and APIs and things that are in the full .NET framework that we're not shipping with .NET Core, right? Things to do with imaging or whatever. Some of these things you hear, you're using printing APIs in your web, and don't do that, but people do this, right? So if you've got existing apps, so that's why we needed to support existing stuff. We've got plenty of people that have huge applications and over a decade or of code, and they want to be able to migrate to this, to keep running on this, right? And we also have some popular libraries, some open source libraries that are things like one of our most popular ones is a JSON parsing library, right? It's very popular. We want that to be able to work for existing .NET developers for the full framework, and also on .NET Core on Docker or whatever, right? So that's kind of the idea, was that we really want to make it something where we want you to be able to target whatever, to reuse your code, reuse your libraries. And also you can do things like, you can start with something that targets the full framework. You can toggle that off and say, target just .NET Core. Oh, okay, these two things of our application break. I can refactor that out of the app. I can run it as a separate service, or I can rewrite it using a different library. You know what I mean? So that is a migration path that you can use, is target the full framework and then see what over time refactor that out, and then you can target just .NET Core. Mm-hmm. So yeah, question is, if you're starting over greenfield development, new company, new development, what should you target? Yeah, I would recommend .NET Core for a lot of reasons, and not just cross-platform. There's a lot of other things. There's efficiency, modularity. There's speed things. There's a lot of improvements that we've been able to bring in as part of this update. So, and you do have the flexibility of run it wherever you want, right? So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Kestrel. Yeah. So Kestrel is installed as part. So if you do, you install the .NET SDK and then you build a web application, Kestrel is a package. So it's just like any other package that's installed in, right? So that's how that comes into your application. So now that will serve up your app. I think in this case, by default we'll serve them up on port 80, but we recommend that, in most cases you're going to want to have this serve up on like port 5000, and then you're going to reverse proxy in. That was that documentation thing I pointed out in here about how we recommend running this in production. So if you go to docs.asp.net and then just search for Linux production environment, that's kind of how we'd recommend doing that. And that's not something we came up with. That's a general pattern. People are using that for Node and Docker and a lot of other web frameworks. So cool. All right, good. Yep, one more. Does it run on what? CentOS. CentOS, yes. Yep, there's a, yeah, and I know that because I was using Docker images that were based on CentOS. So, yeah. Unless somebody on the .NET, one of the .NET smart people wants to contradict me, but I'm pretty sure it does. So.
Yeah, it's available for download on Red Hat, CentOS, and Fedora.
Yep, there we go. Cool. So, and like I said, people have got it running on Raspberry Pi in the past, so it's always your fallback.
So if you see any of these columns that are on the right, just have tarballs, you just download them, set the password. And in fact, a lot of them, you can use them on other very similar distros. We've got people in, we've got people in a lot of very close copying.
Oh, yeah. So FreeBSD recently, right? Someone got it? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's call it. Thanks, everybody.